New school, nyepamne ne nyepangi ragala gena, nyepamne ne kudlukula. Ibuloke nongoto ni beti sola, ibuloke dato ni betoto.
Bigi Congo.
Lami te jibe norin te nyame lamin.
Kabona wuloko.
Wuloko na nyita mo lamin.
Pabilenki.
Muna ngata afamole.
Haina.
Ngata. Ngodo le. Fabrama.
Mingi. Baba nyola.
No ngodo le Fabrama.
Na mu jumara kan kuma diten.
Fabrama.
Jumara mu.
Ndele bare muso.
Lunda mana.
Kata.
Jamani mbere.
Lindo ko.
Jamani.
Bari ngodo man kontande.
Bari jamani bana na mu do kontan.
Ngodo minaka ngala min je fon fili tala. Lamin jibe nori nyala.
Lamin ila siran sama ne benki. Yala so dol sayni no ko mo la ko mo.
Ngodo.
Naam.
Iterinte yalo ne lamin hakilo diata bake karamungot. Anu santem ministry ko di ngole si suko na amake ko do holi de
sibitu
bagona de
ala ni ya ko de namo balo
ala ni na ko na karta bulo be dam ala ni je
ngodo
nam
ngodo mon kontan fere
jamani mu ne keda
ifike lamin ki wulo ko no nyintay mon ko do fete malo la ni nyande sila la be la moy kala karam
jamani karam mo be sorande ne ko fasi ka wulo ko no ko
baba
karam bu won ma ko ni ko karam wol sorande amake ko holiday lem ngodo dindi wonyanta sila la ala karango la moy yamen kamen fue man kontan anda mande
alla nyin kombo kura ada dalla kombo ndo la jankara mol soronda do kamen kura ma ra do kombo e don do fanena kara mol soronda kara mol soron lamin ada lo nyino la man tara fe na sokon ala mu nekela
am lamin ite fete malo ko le sinol de ke kar radio to
nga fine
e ko yaari mo lamin
nga fine
ya mo na fonye
bi kabin mina kan tambita nteri maning fatu tambita la siri be la moyka
faru dan so amana tambira jele ni subala la ngaje dindi ngol be jet talanta nen kili waro e be serin jelet
sa lamin ferante ku kili wo keno la ba lamin bi ta ka wulo ko no nyinta mo arami
aman dara fenela
ite dina ko ni man si yakari la sino la moy radio to e balon na
mo ne ka ke afende ba nyara ni alon
kelentel jikot
afende ba mo be ke
ite balontel be cikritel ni man kara me ku kele yaje nata kara na mbasa malaya e tarije
par ñarande kombo courant ho findira kombo ide na rajede ni sonka bay ko lamin manyata la wulo ko kara mo be so da fa ne membe
ko to wole nati bawo ngalle ni lamin kuntal kombo courant o ka fa me kombo courant asototal wala kinay ko e sisu kono bari ni ko e sisu kono be karangol dike la radio ni telel to hani tele masoto to nyaa man tele soto da bongo bar radio be bulan koto batiri sanga ay si ay alama
sa do kala nyaadi ado kala nyaadi
kamun ke nyaadi
radio abo la moy la be mona falaje
ibe la karandirol kala jele
ti talle be radio ko men ka tan
ila subject ro baby jele i baby jele
wala nan ka chojo moy fa dan so wala ngom tambi ka nga dindi ngol de be ikadum bu ngol be kala ma la ka wala de
bari laftalal ideal on ko inde every year second wala fourth
mona ni ko di ha onde ko folle sinila ba ndele sinilo na ba
koto wala fango ye wulindi yalo famo keta bat yu fana bulata ko do me yen nati jambi la min nyanta karana ntel beji ko be nyineka ya bulay kara wulo kana ta kilar ya bambalo yo be bulaje koto dindi ngoy si ayala le sino la moy radio
wala ka munda karam pol man soro la min nyana kara si so na radio
la sila le ayala le sino
dal ko man ko smalo
kilar ya
be bi ko mo sa en bi do ni ko no kera
dengi bruzo
am na ko ro la ba ro sa no radio ba no bari woro radio ni abe je le ba ngamra do man be buljan dala nyara nyar ro ko fendi mo la tan tayra ba ro sa
bara te ku folo ajibe nori na labi tamete
teku
bari ko do famo
nani nyambol si zol le keje kisigi man si zol no le kabon ka nyoma bari nyambu kilo ni manya na kafindi ni nambe ko zol la ga
ngalle limbeta de be nyambo do dilanna
nyara ni ko ridin fennat nyara nata
bari famo kada
Kami bungono nyara ngando ko fele ko kete baru nganda ni pelo landi jak
iyo
di studiara
pendulala ye fongo tanka sina dulu tanka koro
Good day, wonderful viewers and listeners. My name is IMAGERY, your teacher, who is back again to continue with our literature in English lesson. If you can fully remember, the last lessons were on introduction to literature, which took us to the branch of literature called drama. We looked at drama as a lesson. Today, we are going to look at another branch of literature that is called poetry. And by the end of my lesson, you should be able to know the concept poetry, able to know the types of poems that we have, and you should be able to know the elements of poetry that we have. But first, we will start with the concept of poetry. So stay tuned and enjoy the lesson. Poetry is defined as an imaginative composition of rhythmic lines. Poetry analyzes various issues with limited words that are well structured to have a meter and a rhyme. Poetry evokes a poet's feeling about a given subject, that is the theme. That is to say that every poem surrounds itself with a theme. Now, which he or she expresses in rhyme, that is his choice, the choice of words that he will want to use. Maybe line 1 and line 3 will rhyme together, and on rhyme lines, maybe the writer also chooses not to use rhyme when writing his poem, and then divide it into verses and stanzas. Poetry differs from drama and prose because it uses rhyme. The beauty of poetry is enhanced by the evocation of expression of thought and feeling. So that is to say, poetry from the other two branch of literature that we have, because it uses limited and then it compresses words to express the information that it wants its audience to get. From the concept of poetry, we will now move to the types of poem that we have. Just like drama, poetry is also divided into different types. The first one that we have is called a narrative poem. Now, a narrative poem is a poem in which the poet clearly uses characters, like we told you. Just like drama as a branch of literature, it uses characters, which are the people, the animal, or the object that act in a play. Poetry also uses characters. It uses plot, which is the sequence of events in a literary work. It uses scenes to retell how an event once occurred. Narrative like a story that is told in the form of a poem. Remember, since it is narrative, we are still explaining what already happened in the past. Example of that could be The Proud King, which is one of the poems of the Grade 12. Now, from the narrative poem, we move to another type of poem that is called ideal. Now, ideal is a short poem which describes an interesting or a beautiful rural scene or event. If you go to the rural setting, you will realize that there are so many beautiful things that happen there. Now, the ideal is used to describe, is a type of poem that describes interesting happenings or interesting beautiful rural scenes. Example is circumcision in the village. If you go to the village like Jenjamburi, the initiation that happens there is different from how it happens in the urban setting here. So a poem that describes a beautiful rural scene is what we call an ideal. Now, from that, we move to another type of poem that is called folktale. Now, folktale is also a narrative in oral tradition. When we were young, sometimes you will go to your grandma because you want to hear more stories, stories about animals, stories about people, stories about society. Now, those stories are what we call folktales. It includes fables, fable, as you know, is a story that uses animals as characters and teaches moral lesson. It uses legend, which talks about the heroic deeds of people. It also uses myth. It could be interesting as well as horrifying. Now, from folktale, we move to another type of poem that is called negritude. Now, negritude is a word which is used to classify literary works. It is primarily aimed at promoting the beauty, the excellence and the supremacy of the black race. We are talking about poems that talk about the liberation, that support the black race. Those are the poems that we call negritude. It is more or less like a protest poem. Example of that poem is Piano and the Drums. If you can remember, I'm talking to the grade 12s. Piano and Drum is a poem that talk about the African race and also talk about the European race. But in it, we have seen that the writer supports more of the African. He uses the piano to represent the European culture and he uses the drum to represent the African culture. But at the end of the day, you will realize that his love and his admiration for his African culture is more than that of the European culture. So a poem that supports, a poem that talk about the freedom, the liberation of the black race is what we refer to as a negritude. Not only Piano and Drums, but also Anvil and Hammer is also another example of a negritude poem. Now from negritude poem, we move to another type of poem that is called a lullaby. Now, a lullaby is a mother to a child poem in which the former uses soft voice and melodious songs to put the latter to sleep or to make him or her to stop crying. All of us, our mothers have used lullabies on us. Like when a baby is crying and refusing to stop crying, the mother may choose to sing songs, to the beautiful songs that will make the baby to stop crying. Now, a mother to a child poem, in order to stop the child from crying or to make the child to sleep, is what we call, example could be, sleep, sleep, little one, close your eyes, sleep, little one. These are some nice mothers use on their children to make them stop crying or to go to sleep. From lullaby, we move to another type that is called a ballad. Now, a ballad is also a story or a narrative that is told or sung in verse, usually by words of mouth. These are also poems, but they are also sung. From ballad, we move to another type that is called a concite. Now, a concite is an argumentative poem in which the poet agrees or disagrees with the idea of life after death or the existence or the non-existence of heaven or of hell. Now, you will understand that people have different belief about life, different belief about death. Death is something everybody believes, but life after death or the existence of heaven and hell is something that everybody does not believe. Now, this, if a poem is written argumentatively, talking is what we refer to as a concite. From a concite, we move to another type that is called a metaphysical poem. Now, a metaphysical poem is a poem which relates to matters beyond nature or our world. In it, the poet appears fanciful with far-fetched ideas about the supernatural world. These are poems written but about things that are beyond nature here. From the metaphysical poem, we move to another type of poem that is called a lyric. Now, a lyric is a short personal poem expressing emotion. If I am sad and then I write a poem, it's a lyric. It is usually sung during ceremonies or celebrations. From lyric, we move to another type of poem that is called a pastoral poem. Now, a pastoral poem is a poem which relates to life in the village or countryside. Poem that talks about things that happen in the village. Poems that are primarily for the village, written specifically for the village, are what we call a pastoral poem. It has nothing to do with the urban setting, only the rural side and the rural people. That is what we call a pastoral poem. Now, from pastoral poem, we move to another type of poem that is called ode. Now, an ode is usually a long poem. It is a lyric on a definite subject which may cover heroic, horror, strength, bravery, etc., and presented during important occasion. For instance, we want to talk about the bravery of a particular hero, or we want to talk about the magnanimity of a particular leader. Example of that is an ode, but it is presented during important occasions. Now from ode, we move to another type of poem called epic. Now an epic is also a long narrative heroic deed of a person with extra human qualities are mentioned. It also talks about the history of a country. The praise singers use exaggerated words often referred to as poetry. For instance, on the day of the independence, you hear a lot of historical songs about the Gambia. You hear so many things during which people like us learn so, talking about the beautiful nature of the country, talking about the struggle for all that referred to as an epic. From epic, we move to another type of poetry that is called a duet. Now, a duet is a poem, but it is a piece of music. Remember, poetry can also be changed into what? Music. It is the only branch of literature that can be changed from a written poem can be changed to a music. Okay, now this is a piece of music sung or played by two people. When two people come up to sing a song, is what we refer to as a duet. Now from that, we move to another type that is called a satirical. Now a satirical is a form of poem that mocks or ridicules a person's folly or societal institution by exposing their ill. Satire is harvest of corruption, where we can see in the Jefferson society issues like corruption, issues like bribery, issues like drug smuggling, issues like so many things were brought out. That is what we call a satire. So when you ridicule the act of a society in an amazing way, you are using what we call a satire. Now from satirical, we move to another one that is called a traditional poem. Now a traditional poem is a poem which belongs to oral tradition of poetry, new ones, but we are talking about poems that belong to the oral tradition of poetry in Africa, to show you that poetry has started a long time. So when we talk about poetry that has happened long time in Africa and about Africa, is what we refer to as a traditional poem. From that, we move to another type of poem that is called eulogy. Now, eulogy, this is a poem of praise or commendation in which a person's superb qualities and achievements are mentioned. Maybe we want to talk about President Dawda Jawara. We want to talk about his superb qualities. We want to talk about his achievements. Is what we refer to as eulogy. From eulogy, we move to another type that is called a dirge. Now, a dirge is a poem of sadness and sorrow. It can be one of hardship or disappointment. From dirge, we move to another one that is called elegy. Now, elegy is a poem expressing grief on the death of someone. When you recite a poem, example of it is Lonely Days. Lonely Days, you can see women like Fayoyin, Radike, crying, saying words. Those are what we call elegy. From that, we move to another one that is called epitaph. Now, epitaph is usually written on the tomb of the deceased. If you go to the graveyard, you will see something like writings on the grave or the tomb of a deceased. Example of that could be born on the 12th of December 1912, served in the Tapalapa Army, died gallantly on the 23rd of February 2003. May his gentle soul rest in perfect peace. That is an example of an epitaph written on the tomb of the deceased. From epitaph, we move to another subtopic that is elements of poetry. When we talk about elements of poetry, we are referring to the composition of poetry. Now, the first one that we have is poesy. Please take note. The first one that we have is called poesy. Now, poesy is the art of composing or writing of poems. When the act of writing and composing of poems is what we call poesy. Now, poet is a person who writes a poem. You have to take note of the two. Poesy is the art of composing or writing of poems, but a poet is a person who writes a poem or poems. So take note of the two. From poesy, poet, and to style. Now, style refers to the self-desired way in which a poet presents his viewpoint in a poem. Now, people have different styles of doing something. So your self-desired way of how you will present your viewpoint in a poem, it covers the length. It's your decision to choose the kind of length that you want. It is also your decision to decide on the arrangement of how your poem is going to be arranged. Also the choice of words, which is the diction. Maybe you will want to use simple words that everybody will read and understand, or perhaps to use complex words in conveying your message to the readers, and also the rhymic pattern. So style covers all that. From style, we move to another element that is called diction. Now, diction is referred to the writer's selected choice of words. Like I have just mentioned, diction is your choice of words. Maybe you want to use simple words that everybody will read and understand. You want to use complex words to convey the message to your audience. It's up to the person. So, the words could be simple or complex depending on its intended audience. When you're writing a poem for the primary school students, your diction should be a very simple diction. When you are using when your audience are the junior secondary school students, you use different type of words, and when it is senior school students and also university, so diction refers to the choice of words depending on your audience. Now, from diction, we move to another element that is called theme or subject matter. Now, this is the central idea which a poem carries in its content. Every poem surrounds itself with a subject matter. So, how you present your poem should surround a subject matter which is developed in the content. Now, from that, we move to another element that is called structure. Now, structure refers to the makeup or the organization of your poem. People have different ways of structuring their poems. Maybe you want to write your poem in 6 stanzas. Maybe you want to write your poem without stanzas. That is called a free verse. So the structure refers to the makeup or organization of a poem in lines or verses and the stanzas. Each section, that is a stanza, is expected to convey a definite message. So structure has to do with the arrangement of our ideas within the stanzas of the poem. Now, from structure, we move to another element that is called narrative technique. Now, narrative technique refers to the poetic method used by a writer to express his or her thought. It cuts across the use of first person. There are different types of narrative technique. We have the first person narrative technique, the second person narrative technique, and the third person narrative technique. The composition of ideas and the application of rhymed and unrhymed schemes and the diction. So narrative technique refers to the different types of persons that narrate a story. First person, second person, and the third person. From the narrative technique, we move to another element of drama that is called setting. Now, setting, just like drama, setting refers to the time, that is the historical setting, place, that is the geographical setting, and people, that is the social milieu used in a poem, play, or novel. These 3 basic elements are essential in a poet's attempt to wisely impact his or her thought and on audience. Every poem uses setting. If you look at piano and drums, for instance, it uses riverside. the poem uses at the riverside. It means the setting of his poem is I want to write a poem about the village. When I go to the village, it means my setting is at the village. So setting refers to the place and the time and action takes place. From that, we move to another element that is called symbolism. Now, symbolism, we dealt with it in drama, but here it is again as another element of another branch of literature called poetry. Now, symbolism is simply the use of words which represent something else. Like I told you, when one thing stands for something else is what we refer to as symbolism. I gave you an example of the national flag of the Gambia to show you that the red symbolizes the sun, the white symbolizes the peace, the blue for the river Gambia, and the green for the agriculture. So when one thing stands for something else, it is called a symbolism. From symbolism, we move to another element that is called imagery. Now, imagery is a word used to create mental picture of its relevance to the given poem. These are mental pictures that are created on the minds of readers. If I just write on the board here, a man is tapping wine on the palm tree. As soon as I say it, you create a mental picture of someone that is climbing up the palm tree for wine. So those mental pictures that are, like if I mention a word, Cinderella, you immediately create the mental picture of Cinderella in your head. So mental imageries are mental pictures that are created on the minds of readers. This is done in a way that the symbols and other pieces of information are carefully presented to enhance the reader's understanding. Now from that, we will look at the different types of imageries that we have. We have the first one that is called a visual image. Remember, we said that images are mental pictures that are created on the minds of readers. But then we have different types of images. The first one is a visual image. Now, a visual image, this is the use of image which appeal to the eye. If the word is visual, definitely it has to do with the eye. So these are mental pictures created which appeal to the eye. Those are called visual images. From that, we move to another one that is called auditory images. Auditory. Now, this is the use of sound which appeals to the ear, that is the sound effect. The next one is called gustatory images. Now, this is the use of image which appeal to the sense of taste, like salt, like sugar, like sweet, etc. The next one is called tactile or tactual images. Tactile or tactual images are images which appeal to the sense of touch. Example, embrace, hold, touch, etc. Another one is called the thermal image. The use of image of heat which appeal to the skin or the body is called thermal image. The next one is called olfactory image. Now, this refers to the use of image which appeals to the nose, sense of nose. Example, the aroma, the odor, etc. We have another type of image that is called a kinetic image. Now, the kinetic image is the use of words which create a feeling of movement in the reader. Kinetic, hence movement. Example, fly, glide, hold, etc. Comprehensively, all these images above are sensuous images because they appeal to our senses and sometimes attract us. From images and the types of images, we will move to another element that is called atmosphere. You have to listen carefully so that you'll be able to distinguish between atmosphere, mood, and tone. Now, atmosphere, this refers to the prevailing circumstance under which a poet or novelist or playwright writes. The atmosphere influences his mood, which is very carefully published in the writer's tone. So from the atmosphere, we talk about the prevailing circumstance under which the writer writes. Now, the atmosphere of a poet determines the mood of a poem, and the mood of a poem determines the tone that he is going to use, so take note. From that, we will look at tone. Tone and mood work together. My mood determines my tone. So tone and mood work together to create in us a feeling or thought about a poem. Tone refers vividly to the manner in which the poet handles or talks about a particular subject matter. Thus, the tone of the poem could be of anger or happiness, confidence or distrust, content or dissatisfaction, love or resentment, hope or despair, depending on what he or she wants to write on. From the tone, we now look at the mood. Now, the mood is simply the effect of the tone. Like I told you, your mood determines the kind of tone that you're going to use. So just as mood is the effect of an atmosphere, just as it is said, the atmosphere also determines my mood. Put very simply, the tone of the poem is triggered by the mood of the writer as a result of an existing atmosphere. The tone also creates a mood based on the writer's or the reader's understanding. From that, we move to another element that is called a limerick. Now, a limerick is a humorous poem with 5 lines. The rhyme scheme is A, B, B, and A. A limerick is a poem that has 5 lines. When we talk about A, B, B, we are referring to the rhyme scheme. Now, the rhyme scheme is the representation of letters at the end of every poem. The second and the last rhyme which are with one another, while the third and the fourth rhyme with. When we talk about A, B, B, it means the line 1 and line 2 have the same end sound, line 3 and line 4 have the same end sound, then the last line have the same end sound with the first 2. So that is why we have the rhyme scheme A, B, B, A. We will deal with rhyming scheme as the lesson proceeds. From limerick, we move to another one that is called acrostic or paracrostic. Now, this is a poem in which the initial letters of each line or verse reproduce a word. They are like abbreviations. This is a very common poem found in homes and offices, used as a guideline on strict principles. Example, we have hen. When we talk about hen, what does hen means? Hen means hatch as many as possible, for everyone needs your egg for growth and vitality in order to build a nation healthy and strong. So the acrostic there refers to the word that it creates at the beginning of every word. If you look at the 3 lines that we have there, the first one starts with H, the second one starts with E, and the third one starts with N. So if you put up those letters, they make up a word that we call hen. It means something else. These are sometimes abbreviations that stand for something else. Well, this takes us to the end of our class today, and I hope you have enjoyed the lesson, but the elements of poetry are not still completed, so I advise that you follow the lesson so that you can understand as many of it as possible. So always remember to stay home, wash your hands with clean water, and stay healthy. Thank you.